Oi, hello there, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to The Voyages of Doctor Dolittle by Hugh Lofting. The 5th chapter, The Shellfish Riddle Solved at Last. So Dr. Dolittle, with a crown on his head, sat down upon the shore like King Canute, and waited, and for a whole hour the porpoises kept going and coming, bringing up different kinds of sea beasts from the deep to see if they could help him. Many and curious were the creatures they produced. It would seem, however, that there were very few things that spoke shellfish, except the shellfish themselves. Still, the porpoises grew a little more hopeful when they discovered a very old sea urchin, a funny ball-like little fellow with long whiskers all over him, who said he could not speak pure shellfish. But he used to understand starfish enough to get along when he was young. This was coming nearer, even if it wasn't anything to go crazy about. Leaving the urchin with us, the porpoises went off once more to hunt up a starfish. They were not long getting one, for they were quite common in those parts. Then, using the sea urchin as an interpreter, they questioned the starfish. He was a rather stupid sort of creature, but he tried his best to be helpful, and after a little patient examination we found, to our delight, that he could speak shellfish moderately well. Feeling quite encouraged, the doctor and I now got into the canoe, and with the porpoises, the urchin and the starfish swimming alongside, we paddled very gently out till we were close under the towering shell of the great snail. And then began the most curious conversation I have ever witnessed. First, the starfish would ask the snail something, and whatever answer the snail gave, the starfish would tell it to the sea urchin. The urchin would tell it to the porpoises, and the porpoises would tell it to the doctor. In this way we obtained considerable information, mostly about the very ancient history of the animal kingdom. But we missed a good many of their finer points in the snail's longer speeches on account of the stupidity of the starfish and all this translating from one language to another. While the snail was speaking, the doctor and I put our ears against the wall of his shell and found that we could in this way hear the sound of his voice quite plainly. It was as the fidget had described, deep and bell-like, but of course we could not understand a single word he said. However, the doctor was by this time terrifically excited about getting near to learning the language, and he had sought so long. And presently, by making the other fishes repeat over and over again short phrases which the snail used, he began to put words together for himself. You see, he was already familiar with 1 or 2 fish languages, and that helped him quite a little. After he had practiced for a while like this, he leaned over the side of the canoe, and putting his face below the water, tried speaking to the snail direct. It was hard and difficult work, and hours went by before he got any results. But presently I could tell by the happy look on his face that little by little he was succeeding. The sun was low in the west, and the cool evening breeze was beginning to rustle softly through the bamboo groves when the doctor finally turned from his work and said to me, "Stubbins, I have persuaded the snail to come in onto the dry part of the beach and let me examine his tail. Will you please go back to the town and tell the workmen to stop working on the theatre for today? Then go on to the palace and get my medicine bag. I think I left it under the throne in the audience chamber." And remember, Polynesia whispered as I turned away, not a word to a soul. If you get asked questions, keep your mouth shut. Pretend you have a toothache or something. This time when I got back to the shore with the medicine bag, I found the snail high and dry on the beach. Seeing him in his full length like this, it was easy to understand how old-time superstitious sailors had called him the sea serpent. He certainly was a most gigantic and in his way a graceful, beautiful creature. John Dolittle was examining a swelling on his tail. From the bag which I had brought, the doctor took a large bottle of embrocation and began rubbing the sprain. Next, he took all the bandages he had in the bag and fastened them end to end. But even like that, they were not long enough to go more than halfway round the enormous tail. The doctor insisted that he must get the swelling strapped tight somehow, so he sent me off to the palace once more to get all the sheets from the royal linen closet. These Polynesia and I tore into bandages for him, and at last, after terrific exertions, we got the sprain strapped to his satisfaction. The snail really seemed to be quite pleased with the attention he had received, and he stretched himself in lazy comfort when the doctor was done. In this position, when the shell on his back was empty, you could look right through it and see the palm trees on the other side. I think one of us had better sit up with him all night, said the doctor. We might put Bumpo on that duty. He's been napping all day. I know. In the summer house, it's a pretty bad sprain, that. And if the snail shouldn't be able to sleep, he'll be happier with someone with him for company. He'll get all right, though. In a few days, I should judge. If it wasn't so confoundedly busy, I'd sit up with him myself. I wish I could, because I still have a lot of things to talk over with him. But doctor, said Polynesia, as we prepared to go back to the town, you ought to take a holiday. All kings take holidays once in a while, every one of them. King Charles, for instance. Of course, Charles was before your time, but he was always holiday making. Not that he was ever what you would call a model king, but just the same, he was frightfully popular. Everybody liked him, even the golden carp in the fish pond at Hampton Court. As a king, the only thing I had against him was his inventing those stupid little snappy dogs they call King Charles Spaniels. There are lots of stories told about poor Charles, but that, in my opinion, is the worst thing he did. However, all this is beside the point. As I was saying, kings have to take holidays the same as anybody else. And you haven't taken one since you were crowned, have you now? No, said the doctor. I suppose that's true. Well, now I'll tell you what you do, said she. As soon as you get back to the palace, you publish a royal proclamation that you are going away for a week into the country for your health. And you're going without any servants, you understand? Just like a plain person. It's called traveling incognito. When kings go off like that, they all do it. It's the only way they can ever have a good time. Then the week you're away, you can spend lolling on the beach back there with a snail. How's that? I'd like to, said the doctor. It sounds most attractive. But there's that new theatre to be built. None of our carpenters would know how to get those rafters on without me to show them. And then there are the babies. These native mothers are so frightfully ignorant. Oh, bother the theatre, and the babies too, snapped Polynesia. The theatre can wait a week, and as for the babies, they never have anything more than colic. How do you suppose babies get along before you came here? For heaven's sake, take a holiday. You need it. The 6th chapter, The Last Cabinet Meeting. From the way Polynesia talked, I guessed that this idea of a holiday was part of her plan. The doctor made no reply, and we walked on silently towards the town. I could see nevertheless that her words had made an impression on him. After supper, he disappeared from the palace without saying where he was going, a thing he had never done before. Of course, we all knew where he had gone, back to the beach to sit up with the snail. We were sure of it because he had said nothing to Bumpu about attending to the matter. As soon as the doors were closed upon the cabinet meeting that night, Polynesia addressed the ministry.
Look here, you fellows,
She said.
We've simply got to get the doctor to take this holiday somehow. Unless we're willing to stay in this blessed island for the rest of our lives.
But what difference, Bumpo asked, is his taking a holiday going to make? Impatiently, Polynesia turned upon the Minister of the Interior.
Don't you see? If he has a clear week to get thoroughly interested in his natural history again, marine stuff, his dream of seeing the floor of the ocean and all that, there may be some chance of his consenting to leave this pesky place. But while he is here on duty as king, he never gets a moment to think of anything outside of the business of government.
Yes, that's true. He's far too consententious, Bumpo agreed.
And besides,
Polynesia went on,
his only hope of ever getting away from here would be to escape secretly. He's got to leave while he is holiday making, incognito, when no one knows where he is or what he's doing but us. If he built a ship big enough to cross the sea in, all the Indians would see it and hear it being built, and they'd ask what it was for. They would interfere. They'd sooner have anything happen than to lose the doctor. Why, I believe if they thought he had any idea of escaping, they would put chains on him.
Yes, I really think they would, I agreed. Yet without a ship of some kind, I don't see how the doctor is going to get away, even secretly.
Well, I'll tell you, said Polynesia. If we do succeed in making him take this holiday, our next step will be to get the sea snail to promise to take us all in his shell and carry us to the mouth of Puddleby River. If we can once get the snail willing, the temptation will be too much for John Dolittle, and he'll come, I know. Especially as he'll be able to take those new plants and drugs of Long Arrow's to the English doctors, as well as see the floor of the ocean on the way.
How thrilling, I cried. Do you mean the snail could take us under the sea all the way back to Puddleby?
Certainly,
said Polynesia.
A little trip like that is nothing to him. He would crawl along the floor of the ocean, and the doctor could see all the sights. Perfectly simple. Oh, John Dolittle will come all right, if we can only get him to take that holiday, and if the snail will consent to give us a ride.
Golly, I hope he does, sighed Jip. I'm sick of those beastly tropics. They make you feel so lazy and good for nothing. And there are no rats or anything here. Not that a fellow would have the energy to chase them, even if there were. My, wouldn't I be glad to see old Puddleby in the garden again, and won't Dab be glad to have us back? Ruff. By the end of next month, said I, it will be 2 whole years since we left England, since we pulled up the anchor at Kingsbridge and bumped our way out into the river.
And got stuck on the mud bank,
added Chi-Chi in a dreamy, faraway voice. Do you remember how all the people waved to us from the river wall? I asked.
Yes,
and I suppose they've often talked about us in the town since," said Chip, wondering whether we're dead or alive. "Cease," said Bumpo. "I feel I am about to weep from sediment." The final chapter, the 7th chapter, the Doctor's Decision. Well, you can guess how glad we were when the next morning the Doctor, after his all-night conversation with the snail, told us that he had made up his mind to take the holiday. A proclamation was published right away by the town crier that His Majesty was going into the country for a 7-day rest, but that during his absence the palace and the government offices would be kept open as usual. Polynesia was immensely pleased. She at once set quietly to work making arrangements for our departure, taking good care the while that no one should get an inkling of where we were going, what we were taking with us, the hour of our leaving, or which of the palace gates we would go out by. Cunning old schemer that she was, she forgot nothing, and not even we, who were of the Doctor's party, could imagine what reason she had for some of her preparations. She took me inside and told me that the one thing I must remember to bring with me was all of the Doctor's notebooks. Long Arrow, who was the only Indian let into the secret of our destination, said he would like to come with us as far as the beach to see the great snail, and him Polynesia told to be sure and bring his collection of plants. Bumpo she ordered to carry the Doctor's high hat carefully hidden under his coat. She sent off nearly all the footmen who were on night duty to do errands in the town, so that there should be as few servants as possible to see us leave. And midnight, the hour when most of the townspeople would be asleep, she finally chose for our departure. We had to take a week's food supply with us for the royal holiday, so with our other packages we were heavy laden when on the stroke of 12 we opened the west door of the palace and stepped cautiously and quietly into the moonlit garden. "Tiptoe incognito," whispered Bumpo, as we gently closed the heavy doors behind us. No one had seen us leave. At the foot of the stone steps leading from the Peacock Terrace to the sunken rosary, something made me pause and look back at the magnificent palace which we had built in this strange, far-off land where no white men but ourselves had ever come. Somehow I felt it in my bones that we were leaving it tonight, never to return again. And I wondered what other kings and ministers would dwell in its splendid halls when we were gone. The air was hot and everything was deadly still, but for the gentle splashing of the tame flamingos paddling in the lily pond, suddenly the twinkling lantern of a night watchman appeared round the corner of a cypress hedge. Polynesia plucked at my stocking and in an impatient whisper bade me hurry before our flight be discovered. On our arrival at the beach, we found the snail already feeling much better, and now able to move his tail without pain. The porpoises, who are by nature inquisitive creatures, were still hanging about in the offing to see if anything of interest was going to happen. Polynesia, the plotter, while the Doctor was occupied with his new patient, signalled to them and drew them aside for a little private chat. "Now see here, my friends," she said, speaking low. "You know how much John Dolittle has done for the animals, given his whole life up to them, one might say. Well, here is your chance to do something for him. Listen, he got made king of this island against his will, see? And now that he has taken the job on, he feels that he can't leave it. Thinks the Indians won't be able to get along without him, and all that. Which is nonsense, as you and I very well know. All right, now here's the point.
If this snail were only willing to take him and us and a little baggage, not very much, 30 or 40 pieces, say, inside his shell and carry us to England, we feel sure that the doctor would go. Because he's just crazy to mess about on the floor of the ocean. What's more, this would be his one and only chance of escape from the island. Now, it is highly important that the doctor return to his own country to carry on his proper work, which means such a lot to the animals of the world. So what we want you to do is to tell the sea urchin, to tell the starfish, to tell the snail to take us in his shell and carry us to Puddleby River. Is that plain?
Quite, said the porpoises, and we will willingly do our very best to persuade him, for it is, as you say, a perfect shame for the great man to be wasting his time here when he is so much needed by the animals.
And don't let the doctor know what you're about, said Polynesia as they started to move off. He might balk if he thought we had any hand in it. Get the snail to offer on his own account to take us. See?
John Dolittle, unaware of anything save the work he was engaged on, was standing knee-deep in the shallow water, helping the snail try out his mended tail to see if it were well enough to travel on. Bumpo and Long Arrow, with Chee-Chee and Jip, were lolling at the foot of a palm a little way up the beach. Polynesia and I now went and joined them. Half an hour passed. What success the porpoise had met with we did not know, till suddenly the doctor left the snail's side and came splashing out to us, quite breathless. "What do you think?" he cried. "While I was talking to the snail just now, he offered of his own accord to take us all back to England inside his shell. He says he has got to go on a voyage of discovery anyway, to hunt up a new home, now that the deep hole is closed. Said it wouldn't be much out of his way to drop us at Puddleby River if we cared to come along. Goodness, what a chance! I'd love to go to examine the floor of the ocean, all the way from Brazil to Europe. No man ever did it before. What a glorious trip! Oh, that I had never allowed myself to be made king. Now I must see the chance of a lifetime slip by." He turned from us and moved down the sands, again to the middle beach, gazing wistfully, longing out at the snail. There was something peculiarly sad and forlorn about him as he stood there on the lonely, moonlit shore, the crown upon his head, his figure showing sharply black against the glittering sea behind. Out of the darkness at my elbow, Polynesia rose and quietly moved down to his side.
"Now, doctor,"
said she in a soft, persuasive voice, as though she were talking to a wayward child.
"You know this king business is not your real work in life. These natives will be able to get along without you, not so well as they do with you, of course, but they'll manage. The same as they did before you came. Nobody can say you haven't done your duty by them. It was their fault. They made you king. Why not accept the snail's offer and just drop everything now and go? The work you'll do, the information you'll carry home will be of far more value than what you're doing here."
"Good friend," said the doctor, turning to her sadly, "I cannot. They would go back to their old unsanitary ways. Bad water, uncooked fish, no drainage, enteric fever, and the rest. No, I must think of their health, their welfare. I began life as a people's doctor. I seem to have come back to it in the end. I cannot desert them. Later, perhaps, something will turn up, but I cannot leave them now."
"That's where you're wrong, doctor," said she. "Now is when you should go. Nothing will turn up. The longer you stay, the harder it will be to leave. Go now, tonight."
"What? Steal away without even saying goodbye to them? Why, Polynesia, what a thing to suggest!
A fat chance they would give you to say goodbye, snorted Polynesia, growing impatient at last. I tell you, Doctor, if you go back to that palace tonight for goodbyes or anything else, you will stay there. Now this moment is the time for you to go. The truth of the old parrot's words seemed to be striking home, for the doctor stood silent a minute, thinking.
But there are the notebooks, he said presently. I would have to go back to fetch them. I have them here, Doctor, said I, speaking up. All of them. Again he pondered. And Long Arrow's collection, he said. I would have to take that also with me. It is here, O kindly one, came the Indian's deep voice from the shadow beneath the palm. But what about provisions? Asked the doctor. Food for the journey.
We have a week's supply with us for our holiday, said Polynesia. That's more than we will need.
For the third time the doctor was silent and thoughtful. And then there's my hat, he said fretfully at last. That settles it. I'll have to go back to the palace. I can't leave without my hat. How could I appear in Puddleby with this crown on my head? Here it is, Doctor, said Bumpo, producing the hat, old, battered and beloved, from under his coat. Polynesia had indeed thought of everything. Yet even now we could see the doctor was still trying to think up further excuses. "O kindly one," said Long Arrow, "why tempt ill fortune? Your way is clear. Your future and your work beckon you back to your foreign home beyond the sea. With you will go also what lore I too have gathered for mankind, to lands where it will be of wider use than it can ever hear. I see the glimmerings of dawn in the eastern heaven. Day is at hand. Go before your subjects are abroad. Go before your project is discovered. For truly I believe that if you go not now, you will linger the remainder of your days, a captive king in Popsipetel." Great decisions often take no more than a moment in the making. Against the now paling sky, I saw the doctor's figure suddenly stiffen. Slowly he lifted the sacred crown from off his head and laid it on the sands. And when he spoke, his voice was choked with tears. "They will find it here," he murmured, "when they come to search for me. And they will know that I have gone. My children, my poor children. I wonder, will they ever understand why it was I left them? I wonder, will they ever understand and forgive?" He took his old hat from Bumpo, then, facing Long Arrow, gripped his outstretched hand in silence. "You decide aright, O kindly one," said the Indian, "though none will miss and mourn you more than Long Arrow, the son of Golden Arrow. Farewell, and may good fortune ever lead you by the hand." It was the first and only time I ever saw the doctor weep. Without a word to any of us, he turned and moved down the beach into the shallow water of the sea. The snail humped up its back and made an opening between its shoulders and the edge of its shell. The doctor clambered up and passed within. We followed him. After handing up the baggage, the opening shut tight with a whistling suction noise. Then, turning in the direction of the east, the great creature began moving smoothly forward, down the slope into the deeper waters. Just as the swirling dark green surf was closing in above our heads, the big morning sun popped his rim up over the edge of the ocean, and through our transparent walls of pearl we saw the watery world about us suddenly light up with that most wondrously colourful of visions, a daybreak beneath the sea. The rest of the story of our homeward voyage is soon told. Our new quarters were found very satisfactory inside the spacious shell. The snail's wide back was extremely comfortable to sit and lounge on, better than a sofa, when you once got accustomed to the damp and clammy feeling of it. He asked us shortly after we started if we wouldn't mind taking off our boots, as the hobnails in them hurt his back as we ran excitedly from one side to another to see the different sights. The motion was not unpleasant, very smooth and even. In fact, but for the landscape passing outside, you would not know, on the level going, that you were moving at all. I had always thought for some reason or other that the bottom of the sea was flat. I found that it was just as irregular and changeful as the surface of the dry land. We climbed over great mountain ranges with peaks towering above peaks. We threaded our way through dense forests of tall sea plants. We crossed wide empty stretches of sandy mud like deserts, so vast that you went on for a whole day with nothing ahead of you but a dim horizon. Sometimes the scene was moss-covered, rolling country, green and restful to the eye like rich pastures, so that you almost looked to see sheep cropping on these underwater downs. And sometimes the snail would roll us forward inside him like peas when he suddenly dipped downward to descend into some deep, secluded valley with steeply sloping sides. In these lower levels, we often came upon the shadowy shapes of dead ships, wrecked and sunk, heaven only knows how many years ago, and passing them we would speak in hushed whispers like children seeing monuments in churches. Here too, in the deeper, darker waters, monstrous fishes, feeding quietly in caves and hollows, would suddenly spring up, alarmed at our approach, and flash away into the gloom with the speed of an arrow, while other bolder ones, all sorts of unearthly shapes and colours, would come right up and peer in at us through the shell. I suppose they think we are a sort of sanaquarium, said Bumpo. I'd hate to be a fish. It was a thrilling and ever-changing show. The doctor wrote or sketched incessantly. Before long we had filled all the blank notebooks we had left. Then we searched our pockets for any odd scraps of paper on which to jot down still more observations. We even went through the used books a second time, writing in between the lines, scribbling all over the covers, back and front. Our greatest difficulty was getting enough light to see by. In the lower waters it was very dim. On the third day we passed a band of fire eels, a sort of large marine glowworm, and the doctor asked the snail to get them to come with us for a way. This they did, swimming alongside, and the light was very helpful, though not brilliant. How our giant shellfish found his way across that vast and gloomy world was a great puzzle to us. John Dolittle asked him by what means he navigated, how he knew he was on the right road to Puddleby River, and what the snail said in reply got the doctor so excited that, having no paper left, he tore out the lining of his precious hat and covered it with notes. By night, of course, it was impossible to see anything, and during the hours of darkness, the snail used to swim instead of crawl. When he did so, he could travel at a terrific speed just by waggling that long tail of his. This was the reason why we completed the trip in so short a time, 5.5 days. The air of our chamber, not having a change in the whole voyage, got very close and stuffy, and for the first 2 days we all had headaches. But after that we got used to it and didn't mind it in the least. Early in the afternoon of the 6th day, we noticed we were climbing a long, gentle slope. As we went upward, it grew lighter. Finally, we saw that the snail had crawled right out of the water altogether and now had come to a dead stop on a long strip of grey sand. Behind us, we saw the surface of the sea rippled by the wind. On our left was the mouth of a river with the tide running out. while in front the low flat land stretched away into the mist, which prevented one from seeing very far in any direction. A pair of wild ducks with craning necks and whirring wings passed over us and disappeared like shadows seaward. As a landscape, it was a great change from the hot, brilliant sunshine of Popsipetel. With the same whistling suction sound, the snail made the opening for us to crawl out by. As we stepped down upon the marshy land, we noticed that a fine, drizzling autumn rain was falling. "Can this be Merry England?" asked Bumpo, peering into the fog. "Doesn't look like any place in particular. Maybe the snail hasn't brought us right after all."
Yes,
sighed Polynesia, shaking the rain off her feathers.
this is England all right. You can tell it by the beastly climate.
"Oh, but fellows," cried Jip, as he sniffed up the air in great gulps, "it has a smell, a good and glorious smell. Excuse me a minute, I see a water rat."
Shh, listen,
said Chi-Chi, through teeth that chattered with the cold.
"This Puddleby church clock striking 4. Why don't we divide up the baggage and get moving? We've got a long way to foot it home across the marshes."
"Let's hope," I put in, "that Dab-Dab has a nice fire burning in the kitchen." "I'm sure she will," said the doctor, as he picked out his old handbag from among the bundles. "With this wind from the east, she'll need it to keep the animals in the house warm. Come on, let's hug the riverbank so we don't miss our way in the fog. You know there's something rather attractive in the bad weather of England, when you've got a kitchen fire to look forward to. 4 o'clock, come along, will just be a nice time for tea." The end. Good night, baby Elias.